all have experienced some form of relational trauma, and yes, healing is possible for everyone. Relational trauma is trauma.
Thank you.
Right? Relational trauma. Most people have like, I don't have trauma. I wasn't, beaten or sexually abused, or I wasn't in a war, or I didn't have car accidents. Wait a minute here, folks. This is trauma. And the general public does not understand that being picked on, being bullied, being the recipient of a narcissistic parent or a passive accommodating parent is really traumatic for kids, because every time our parent is in one of their trauma responses, we lose our safe parent. So it's a betrayal. It's the thing that I don't think people are aware of. Each time our parents in their trauma response, the child loses a safe parent, they're left all alone, and they accumulate these betrayals and losses. When parents don't take responsibility, kids do 100% of the time. So we just accumulate all this stuff, right? So many of us have it. And so we grow up with all these complex relationships with our primary caregivers. When we become adults, we seek our partners to try to heal these unresolved, largely unconscious wounds. So for me, the awareness is huge. Like, wow, this behavior of finding unavailable men is connected to my upbringing, huge. Even more importantly is I could do something about it.
Yeah.
So the term gaslight effect is mine based on what I saw was the impact of gaslighting over time in the patients I was treating.
We've defined it, I think, but probably not as well as you can define it.
It's like a spectrum almost.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, because right now I'm engaged in some research really to delineate the different levels, if you will, of gaslighting along that spectrum, from something that's mild to something that's soul destroying, right?
Right.
Because sometimes when I write about it or I speak about it, somebody will say, well, that's not gaslighting because it's too mild, or that sounds like it's just bad behavior. But gaslighting has several hallmarks, if you will. So gaslighting is when it's an insidious type of emotional abuse, repeated over time in a power relationship. That's really important. Repeated over time within a relationship where the one person has power. The person in power seeks to undermine your reality, your character, and sometimes leads you to second guess yourself to the point where you feel like you're going crazy. So the gaslighter is seeking to sow seeds of doubt by pivoting, by insisting that their reality is the reality, and moving the conversation from taking responsibility or answering your question or even agreeing about what's real out there, to blaming you, deflecting responsibility, and telling you, no, your perceptions are not accurate. And in fact, there's something wrong with you. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Gaslight Effect podcast. I am thrilled to introduce to you and to host today my friend and colleague, Dan Goleman. I've known Dan for more than 20 years, and he is the reason that we have the field of emotional intelligence. Please tell us how you wrote your first book and then how you came through that continuum of books to this last book, which is
It was your friend and mine, Peter Salovey, with his then graduate student, Jack Mayer, as we call him, who wrote the first article on emotional intelligence. At the time, I was a science journalist at the New York Times, and I saw my mandate was to look at academic articles in peer-reviewed journals, see what was new and interesting and might appeal to the millions of readers of the New York Times, and write about it in a way where the people who know about it, like emotional intelligence, wouldn't complain. That was my job. So I saw this article in a rather obscure journal called Emotional Intelligence. And I thought, wow, that is such a great term. It's an oxymoron. You never put emotions together with intelligence. But when you think about being intelligent about emotion, all of a sudden it makes sense. So I used that term as the title of a book I was writing anyway, which was about emotions in the brain. And that framework somehow really caught on. You know, it was on the cover of Time, and it just struck a nerve really around the world and became a kind of global phenomenon. When I wrote the book, Emotional Intelligence, it was a brand new concept and there was no direct data. So I used converging data to make a case that, hey, this personal skill set matters in life. And during your school years, you know, IQ really predicts strongly how well you do in school, but it doesn't really hold up as a predictor in life. I just saw some data about that. Engineers were asked to rate other engineers they work with on how effective they are as engineers. And it turned out that those ratings didn't correlate at all with IQ. They correlated strongly with emotional intelligence. So basically, my view is that IQ and cognitive abilities matter enormously. They determine not just how well you'll do in school, but what profession you can enter. But once you're in that door, how you do doesn't really depend so much on those abilities because everyone else has them.
That's exactly right.
It's how well you manage yourself, how well you relate to others, which is basically emotional intelligence. So
we tell that to our Yale students all the time, that IQ will get them in the door, but EQ will get them out of the door.
Yes, that's a hard message. If you've worked so hard to get into Yale, that must be a hard message to hear, but
yeah, a little bit.
Heads up. Anyway,
I just want to say that when I read your book for the first time, I didn't know you at the time, and I thought I was so captivated by your first example of the bus driver, which you later then brought back in Optimal. And I thought everyone is going to recognize this as like some deep truth that we all know. I mean, there was that resonance then and now again in your book, which we'll get to in a minute, I hope. But your new book, but it really was, oh my God, of course. Like, oh my God, of course. That makes so much sense.
Yes, and that's the thing. We all kind of know it intuitively. So the bus driver, if you're not familiar with the story, it was striking. I took a bus up Madison Avenue in New York, and the bus driver was remarkable. He welcomed everybody on the bus personally in a way that felt true. And he was talking to people, everyone on the bus as he went up Madison. And when they got off the bus, he'd say, you know, have a wonderful day to each person, meaning it. And he really had an impact. He had fans. I found out years later, because they had an obituary in the New York Times, his name was Govan Brown. He had 3,000 or more letters of commendation, not one complaint over.
Oh my goodness.
He was the pastor of a Black church on Long Island, and he felt the people on his bus were part of his flock. So he was, you know, relating to them in a very warm, welcoming way. He was just an outstanding person. So experiencing him was an outstanding experience. And, you know, we all have examples of nutritious people that we've known,
yes,
for whom we know.
I love that word. Yeah, exactly. And so people on the bus got off feeling nourished, right?
Mm-hmm.
And rather than crabby, because wasn't it raining that day, or it was not, the weather?
No, it was sweltering. It was an August day.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So it was very hot, and everybody who gets on a bus, crabby,
kind of cranky, yeah.
Crowded. And so he just transformed that experience and nourished. Yeah. So tell us where your writing took you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so eager for you to get to your new book.
So I'm essentially a writer and a psychologist, and I've written about several topics, but I've been the co-director of a consortium on research on emotional intelligence in organizations. And over 25 years, there's been a mountain of data about this, as opposed to when I first wrote about it. So my co-chair, Carrie Chernis, and I wrote this book, which is just coming out January 9th, Optimal, starting with data from a study that was done at Harvard Business School, where people kept journals of what their day was like. And that's the notion of having a really good day. That's the optimal day. And we've all had such days. It's not like getting in flow. Flow is that one time when you outdid yourself and you can't make it happen again. But if you focus on what you're doing and drop your distractions, which are internal more than external anyway, you can get into a place where you are highly effective, you're highly productive, you're highly satisfied, highly engaged, you connecting well with the people around you, you feel good about what you're doing, you enjoy it. That's the optimal day. And we make the case that emotional intelligence is a framework, is a way of cultivating the qualities that make such days more likely. And then we look at what it would mean to make an organization emotionally intelligent, which is one of the key points of the book. So at the individual level, it's what can I do to be more like Govan Brown or to have a wonderful day more often than a bummer day. And by the way, one of the people whose work we appreciate is Mark Brackett, who I know you work with. We talk about his way of gauging your being self-aware. The way I think of emotional intelligence, there are 4 parts: self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skill, essentially. And I think Mark's method is really good for honing an awareness of what you're feeling, which is a foundational strength in emotional intelligence.
And I think the work we do at Yale really helps to be granular about your emotions, so that when you can name them, then you can tame them, is what we say. And being able to discriminate between lots of different feelings or lots of different emotions in the family of feelings of anger or disappointment or sadness.
I hope that this update of emotional intelligence will reach many people. Basically, we review through a more current lens the basics of my model of emotional intelligence. So I look at those 4 domains: self-awareness, self-management, which you just mentioned, really, and then empathy and social skill, how you recognize emotions in other people and put it all together to have effective relationships. So we have a model which is based on research of star performers in the workplace and the qualities or competencies of those people who are remarkable, and which of those competencies nest within one or another domain. And if listeners want to know more about it, they can look at the book, or even better, I think, I have a Daniel Goleman emotional intelligence program online where you can look at each of these abilities within yourself and reflect on it and practice it and get better. But we feel strongly that organizations should be more, what shall I say, explicit in creating an emotionally intelligent culture. And that means not just having these things embedded in the DNA, which is very true. It's surprising, Robin, how common these qualities are as abilities that companies want and look for and say and pride themselves on, but they use their own language. So sometimes it's hard to find. But we find a couple of things are the hallmarks of organizations or companies that are more emotionally intelligent. And we look, for example, at MD Anderson, which is the #1 cancer clinic in America. It's a remarkable place down in Texas. And the CEO there is a champion of emotional intelligence. We looked at Progressive, the insurance company, which many people know through those commercials with Flo, that woman in white. It's she's been around for a long time, but it turns out that the value of that company has skyrocketed over the last decade or two. And John Murphy, who was the head of the customer relations area, which is who really is the interface with people, for example, are buying insurance, is also a champion of emotional intelligence. So it helps, we find, enormously to have someone in the organization, in a business, for example, from the business side, say this matters here. We want this. It helps because then HR, who doesn't have as much clout usually as someone in the C-suite, for example, can implement training programs. So the ingredients that we spot are these. Someone who champions emotional intelligence, who's influential in that organization. Second, showing that it matters here. For example, in performance review, it's not just did you get the numbers, how did you get those numbers? Were you driving people to emotional exhaustion, pressuring them to get the numbers, or were you inspiring them, engaging them, exciting them about what we're all doing together? And that's much better, of course.
But I do want to talk a little bit about gaslighting because this is the Gaslight Effect podcast. And people are coming with some expectation that there'll be perhaps an answer to a question like, how does gaslighting interfere with being in an optimal state? Or how is your optimal state impacted by being treated either by your direct supervisor, by your partner, by your organization, as if there's something wrong with your perception, or feeling that there's no psychological safety because you're at risk of being gaslighted, or you're immersed in this gaslighting bubble. So you can start anywhere.
Well, one of the things, Robin, that is very important in my view is that the people around you have full empathy. And by full empathy, I mean this. There's three kinds of empathy, each of which seems to be based in different circuitry in the brain. One is cognitive empathy. I get how you see things. I know the language you use to parse reality, and I can be effective in messaging to you because I know what words you'll understand. Second is emotional empathy, sensing what the other person feels. And responding to that at the emotional level. But the third, I think it's the most important, it's caring about the person. It's called empathic concern, technically. It's like a parent's love for a child. And I think that at work, you want to have a boss who cares about you.
Yes.
Not just who knows how to
I'm
manipulate you
talking about.
because they know what you think and feel, but who actually has your back, who is concerned about your best interest.
Yes.
That is what creates that psychological safety. And as you know, I'm sure, when Google looked at their top performing teams, one of the elements that distinguished them was psychological safety. We call it a sense of belonging. You feel at home there.
Yes.
And you want to feel that way at work. You want to feel you can bring your whole self. And I suppose if someone is gaslighting at work, you don't get validated. You feel like you have to be inhibited. You have to hold yourself back to seem to be the person that they seem to want you to be. Did I get that right, Robin?
Yes, and also that you're not even sure where the ground is.
Yeah.
You may be at work and noticing things going on and speaking out about it, and then being accused of being so stressed out or too paranoid or not really tuned into what you need to be tuned into, focusing on the wrong thing. But actually, you may be focusing on exactly what you need to focus on to see what shifts may be afoot in that organization that turn out to later on be true. But in the meantime, you're being accused of it being your problem
Yeah.
that you can't get
Yeah.
your
You
foot
are
out.
accused,
Yeah.
not them.
R.D. Laing calls it the game of happy family. And what he meant was this, that you feel uneasy because you sense something is off here.
Yep.
Everyone else seems to be going along just fine. And so you feel you can't bring it up. You have to play the game of being happy, being in the family, without acknowledging to yourself even perhaps, but certainly to others, what's off here, what's wrong here.
Yes. And then the gaslighting piece takes that the next step, because then when you do bring it up, you're told it's your fault. Oh, no, no, that's, why are you so paranoid? Like,
Yeah,
no,
you're
Yeah,
dismissed. You're
exactly.
dismissed.
you're dismissed, or
That
it's
one, yep.
deflected. Exactly. Or you're told you're crazy. Like,
Yeah.
no, that didn't happen. That's not what's going on.
That's not what's going on. Exactly. You may have seen something, and everybody interprets things differently, but there's, what shall I say? There's a reality that you're invited implicitly to collude with. And I don't know if you know this, my first book was called Vital Lies. It was about self-deception and collusion,
I
which
did
is
know that.
very relevant to gaslighting.
Exactly.
Because both things go on.